Malthusian Time and the Collapse of Arrival. One of the least examined consequences of modern civilization is the gradual collapse of arrival as a psychological state. Human beings increasingly struggle to experience the sensation that they have truly reached anything stable, complete, or sufficient within their own lives. The condition manifests everywhere, yet often escapes precise articulation because it disguises itself as ambition or self-improvement, productivity, adaptability, or even modern dynamism. In reality, it reflects something much deeper, a civilization structurally incapable of allowing the individual to feel finished. Malthusian time intensifies this phenomenon because it continuously expands possible life trajectories faster than finite human consciousness can inhabit accomplishment itself. The modern individual therefore exists within a permanent state of suspended becoming. He is always approaching some future condition in which life will supposedly begin properly, yet the horizon recedes continuously as he advances towards it. This represents a profound historical transformation in the structure of consciousness. Traditional societies, despite their limitations and brutalities, often possess clearer existential thresholds. One moved through recognizable stages validated socially, spiritually, economically, and symbolically by the surrounding culture. Childhood ended. Apprenticeship ended. Marriage altered your status permanently. Fatherhood altered identity permanently. Mastery within a trade carried communal recognition. Religious rites formalized transition points. The individual increasingly inhabited roles rather than endlessly constructing provisional identities. Modernity has dissolved enormous portions of this architecture. At first glance, this appears entirely emancipatory. The weakening of rigid class systems, inherited occupations, geographic immobility, and suffocating social hierarchies undeniably expanded human freedom. Yet, liberation from fixed structures produced a hidden psychological consequence. When all paths remain theoretically open indefinitely, closure itself becomes increasingly difficult to achieve. The modern individual therefore inhabits an environment where every achievement immediately destabilizes into another optimization cycle. A salary increase no longer represents arrival because exposure to higher tiers of wealth remains constant. A degree no longer signifies intellectual completion because informational abundance reveals endless further domains requiring mastery. Physical fitness no longer stabilizes identity because social media continuously displays superior physiques, younger bodies, more disciplined routines, more refined aesthetics, and increasingly unattainable standards of perfection. Thus, the structure of aspiration itself mutates. The individual no longer pursues goals expecting eventual existential settlement. He enters endless recursive improvement systems lacking natural termination points. This is one reason modern people increasingly speak as though their actual lives perpetually exist, slightly beyond the present moment. One constantly encounters the sentiment that true existence will commence after another threshold has been crossed, after financial security, after self-improvement, after optimization, after healing, after entrepreneurial success, after that side project works, after their body transforms, after enough followers arrive, after enough money accumulates, after their future self finally materializes. Life becomes psychologically deferred. The tragedy is not that people possess ambition. Ambition is ancient. The tragedy is that modern civilization increasingly detaches ambition from culmination. Aspiration no longer leads naturally toward settlement, but toward expanding awareness of further insufficiency. This condition emerges partly because technological civilization annihilates proportion psychologically. Human beings evolved under conditions of local comparison. The average craftsman compared himself primarily against visible competitors within his town or trade. A successful merchant rarely spent his evenings exposed to endless examples of vastly greater wealth from across the planet. Even aristocrats lived within comparatively narrow prestige ecosystems relative to modern standards. Digital hypervisibility destroyed these limitations entirely. The contemporary individual now experiences continuous exposure to statistical anomalies masquerading as ordinary life. billionaires, elite athletes, prodigies, celebrities, exceptional entrepreneurs, aesthetic outliers, polymaths, hyperproductive personalities, and carefully curated representations of success all enter consciousness continuously through algorithmic systems optimized precisely for psychological engagement. The nervous system therefore exists within a permanent state of comparative inflation. This matters profoundly because comparison destroys finality. Achievement stabilizes psychologically only when it exists within a comprehensible hierarchy. Once exposure becomes infinite, every accomplishment shrinks instantly against larger visible examples. Modern consciousness consequently develops difficulty metabolizing success into contentment because the surrounding informational environment constantly destabilizes satisfaction through expanded horizons of possible advancement. One could describe this as existential inflation, just as monetary inflation reduces purchasing power through oversupply of currency. Informational abundance reduces the emotional weight of achievement through oversupply of comparison. The millionaire who once symbolized extraordinary accomplishment now appears merely affluent beside billionaires displayed casually online. Exceptional beauty becomes normalized through endless exposure to digitally perfected aesthetics. Rare luxury loses symbolic gravity because visibility converts rarity into perceived ubiquity. The result is a civilization increasingly incapable of experiencing enoughness. And importantly, this condition extends beyond economics into identity itself. Modernity transformed the self into a permanent project under revision. Previous societies certainly shaped identity heavily through external pressures, yet they often assumed adulthood implied movement toward existential solidity. One became something recognizable. The modern individual instead remains psychologically fluid indefinitely. Adaptability becomes moralized, reinvention becomes idealized, flexibility becomes economically rewarded. Identity itself increasingly resembles software requiring perpetual updates. This perpetual revisability generates enormous psychological instability because human beings require some degree of settled orientation to experience coherence across time. A civilization that endlessly encourages individuals to become something else risks producing populations unable to inhabit themselves fully in the present tense. This instability proves economically useful. Entire industries now depend upon monetizing incompletion structurally. The fitness industry rarely sells bodily health alone. It sells the future perfected self, perpetually hovering just beyond current attainment. The self-help industry similarly thrives by sustaining belief in endless optimization. Productivity culture monetizes the suspicion that one's current mode of existence remains inefficient. Cosmetic industries monetize aging anxiety by treating natural temporality itself as failure. Entrepreneurial culture often frames ordinary stability as latent inadequacy, awaiting disruption through greater ambition. Everywhere, the same psychological structure emerges. The present self is insufficient, and fulfillment resides slightly further ahead. This dynamic transcends capitalism alone. Socialist systems historically generated their own versions of deferred arrival through ideological futurism. Communist rhetoric frequently displaced meaning into the coming utopia, the future revolution, the completed 5-year plan, or the eventual classless society, forever approaching but never fully materializing. The mechanism differed, the existential postponement remained. Malthusian time, therefore, concerns something deeper than economics narrowly conceived. It describes the collision between infinite aspiration and finite existence under conditions of expanding possibility. The crisis emerges because modern civilization continuously multiplies visible alternatives faster than human beings can psychologically consolidate identity, achievement, gratitude, or meaning. This has severe consequences for the experience of time itself. A person unable to arrive existentially gradually loses the ability to inhabit the present fully. Every moment becomes instrumentalized toward future optimization. Relationships become networking opportunities. Hobbies become monetizable. Experiences become content. Leisure becomes recovery for productivity. Rest becomes justified only insofar as it increases future efficiency. Even silence acquires guilt. The soul increasingly experiences itself not as dwelling within life, but as preparing endlessly for life. This may explain the growing fascination many people feel toward fantasies of simplification. The attraction toward cabins, monasteries, farms, offline existence, traditional rituals, small communities, manual labor, liturgy, craftsmanship, and slower rhythms often reflects less hatred of technology itself than exhaustion with permanent psychological incompletion. People increasingly crave environments where identity may stabilize sufficiently for existence to feel inhabitable again. Because beneath Malthusian time lies a terrifying possibility. A civilization may become so structurally addicted to endless becoming that it forgets how to exist at all, and mortality eventually exposes the illusion. The individual spends decades approaching the future version of himself, supposedly worthy of peace, only to discover that the horizon was designed never to stop receding. Death arrives while optimization remains incomplete, revealing retroactively that life had quietly transformed into preparation without culmination. This is the collapse of arrival. Not merely the failure to achieve enough, but the gradual destruction of the very capacity to recognize enoughness when it appears.